My wife was planting reeds when the deputies arrived. Then both officers froze the second they saw me. The HOA president stood in the mud screaming into her phone while my wife planted reeds beside our lake like she couldn't even hear her. She told dispatch my wife was vandalizing community property. What she didn't know was I'd already heard the call come through my ranch scanner from the barn. And what those deputies didn't expect was whose land they were really standing on. If you've ever seen power go too far in a small town, stay with me on this one. And if these kinds of ranch justice stories mean something to you, hit subscribe and come right along. Send a unit immediately. We've got active vandalism of protected community shoreline property at 448 Silver Creek Road. The dispatcher's voice cracked through the ranch scanner hanging beside my workbench just after 10 Saturday morning. I looked up from the tractor engine I'd been rebuilding and listened. Female caller. Agitated. Speaking fast. I recognized the voice before dispatch even repeated the address. Veronica Hale. Outside the open barn door, the wind rolled low across Mercer Lake, bending the tops of the reeds along the shoreline. Elena was down there near the water in faded jeans and her old canvas jacket, kneeling in the mud with a trowel in one hand and a tray of native sedge plugs beside her boots, planting. That was the emergency. The dispatcher came back over the radio. Caller states female suspect is destroying HOA-owned waterfront conservation area. 2 units en route. I wiped grease off my hands with a rag and set it down slowly. Veronica had finally done it. For 3 months, she'd sent violation letters, lien threats, and certified notices demanding my wife tear out the wetland restoration around the lake. 3 months of pretending Mercer Lake belonged to Silver Creek Ridge HOA instead of my family. Now she was calling the sheriff. I stepped out of the barn into cold October sunlight. Gravel crunched beneath my boots as I walked toward the shoreline. Veronica stood across the narrow ranch road in a white insulated vest and expensive sunglasses, one manicured hand pressed against her phone. Her SUV sat crooked beside the ditch, driver door still hanging open. She saw Elena near the water and pointed like she was identifying a fugitive. "That's her," she snapped into the phone. "She's pulling out protected shoreline markers right now." Elena didn't even look up. She pressed another reed into the mud beside the lake and packed the soil gently around the roots. The lake reflected silver under the morning light. Beyond it rose the dark pine ridges my grandfather used to ride horseback through. Long before anybody imagined gated subdivisions out here, I stopped beside Elena without speaking. She glanced up at me once beneath the brim of her cap. "You hear her call?" she asked quietly. Every word. Elena shook her head and pushed damp hair behind one ear. "She's getting desperate." A few yards away, Veronica ended the call and marched toward us across the gravel shoulder. "You need to step away from that shoreline immediately," she barked. "You are actively damaging community property." Elena stayed kneeling. "This is Mercer property, Veronica, same as it was yesterday." "The HOA survey says otherwise." I finally looked at her. "Funny thing about surveys," I said calmly. "Depends who paid for them." Her jaw tightened. Veronica Hale hated calm people, especially when she couldn't intimidate them. She pointed toward the reeds Elena had already planted along the bank. "That swamp garbage is lowering property values across Silver Creek Ridge. We have buyers backing out because this place looks abandoned." Elena stood slowly now, mud staining the knees of her jeans. "These wetlands stop spring flooding," she said. "You know that. I know they look terrible. The lake overflowed twice before we restored the runoff channels. That's not your decision to make. It is when the lake belongs to us." The words landed hard enough to silence the wind between us. Veronica stared at Elena, then at me. For a second, something uncertain flickered across her face. Not fear, recognition. Because unlike most people in Silver Creek Ridge, Veronica knew exactly who I was. Wade Mercer. former Montana State Land Commissioner, the man who'd spent 15 years fighting fraudulent easements and illegal development claims across 3 counties, which meant she also knew something else. If she was calling deputies out here, she better be absolutely sure about that shoreline. She crossed her arms tighter. You should have controlled your wife before it got this far. Elena laughed softly beside me. That sound seemed to irritate Veronica more than anything else. Then the distant sirens started, faint at first, echoing somewhere beyond the pine ridges west of the valley. Veronica straightened immediately, confidence flooding back into her posture. There, she said sharply. Maybe they can explain trespassing laws to both of you. I watched her carefully, not angry, not loud, just watching. Because people like Veronica always made the same mistake. They confused silence with weakness. Down by the water, Elena bent again and planted another reed calmly into the mud. The wind carried the smell of wet earth and lake water across the shoreline. The sirens grew louder, and somewhere behind Veronica's confidence, I could already see the first crack forming. Because she wasn't really trying to stop Elena from planting reeds. She was trying to stop us from protecting that shoreline before winter. And there was only one reason somebody fights that hard over a piece of lakefront they don't legally own. They're planning to take it. The first patrol vehicle turned onto Silver Creek Road just as Veronica smiled. For the first time all morning. I didn't smile back. I just kept watching her, waiting to see how far she was willing to go. The patrol SUVs rolled to a stop beside the ditch, tires crunching gravel hard enough to scatter a flock of blackbirds from the fence posts. 2 deputies stepped out, hands resting near their belts while they scanned the shoreline. Deputy Cole Brennan climbed from the first vehicle. Tessa Ruiz stepped out of the second. Both of them looked from Veronica to Elena standing knee-deep near the reeds. Then they saw me. Cole's expression shifted first, recognition, then caution. Not fear, professional caution. "Morning, Mr. Mercer," he said carefully. "Morning, Cole." Veronica stepped forward before either deputy could say another word. "She's destroying protected HOA shoreline habitat," she snapped, pointing at Elena. "I want her removed from the property immediately." Tessa looked toward the waterline markers hammered into the mud 50 yards downshore. Fresh stakes, bright orange tape. Too fresh. I noticed Cole noticing them too. Elena folded her arms. "Those markers weren't there yesterday. They were installed after the latest survey," Veronica shot back. Cole glanced toward me. "You have paperwork for that survey?" "Not one I've seen." Veronica pulled a folder from under her arm immediately, like she'd rehearsed the move in a mirror. She handed Cole several stapled pages. "The HOA owns protected access rights to this shoreline under Silver Creek conservation agreements." Cole scanned the paperwork without reacting. Tessa crouched near the reeds Elena had planted. "These are native sedges?" Elena nodded. "Restoring runoff filtration." Veronica let out a sharp laugh. "That's what she calls it. Looks more like turning the lake into a swamp." The deputies exchanged another look. Because everybody in western Montana knew what happened when runoff channels failed in spring melt season. Floodwater didn't care about HOA bylaws. Cole handed the papers back slowly. "Mrs. Hale, this looks like a civil property dispute. It's criminal trespassing on land her family's occupied for 3 generations. The HOA survey supersedes that." I almost smiled at that. Almost. Because people who talked about land that way usually didn't understand how dangerous paperwork could become when somebody finally checked it closely. Cole cleared his throat. "Without a court order, we're not removing anyone from property currently occupied by the listed owners." Veronica's face reddened instantly. "So you're refusing to enforce community property rights?" "No, Mom. I'm refusing to make a civil ownership determination from the side of a road." Tessa stood back up beside Elena. "Honestly," she said, looking toward the shoreline, These wetlands probably helped stabilize the bank. Veronica stared at her like she'd committed treason. Elena's restoration project reduced erosion by almost 40% last spring, I said calmly. County runoff reports are public record if anybody wants to read them. Nobody answered that. The wind pushed small ripples across Mercer Lake. Beyond the water sat the rising rooftops of Silver Creek Ridge, expensive timber frame homes stacked along hillsides that used to belong to cattle pasture before developers carved them into half-acre view lots. 2 years earlier, the HOA barely cared about the lake. Then, investors from Bozeman started circling the valley. Suddenly everybody wanted exclusive shoreline amenities, boat slips, kayak launches, private access roads. The lake became money, and Veronica Hale loved money more than peace. She pointed toward Elena again. She's deliberately blocking future shoreline improvements approved by the HOA Development Committee. That caught my attention immediately. Elena noticed it too. Future improvements? She asked quietly. Veronica realized too late she'd said more than she meant to. Cole caught it too. What improvements? Potential improvements, Veronica corrected quickly. Nothing finalized. I watched her carefully now. There it was. The real pressure underneath all the letters and fines. Not landscaping, not reeds, development. The deputies wrapped things up 10 minutes later after confirming no crime had occurred. Cole warned both parties to avoid escalation until ownership records could be clarified through county channels. Veronica looked furious enough to shake apart. Before climbing back into her SUV, she stopped beside me one last time. You should tell your wife to stop planting things she'll just have to tear out later. Elena doesn't tear out healthy roots, I said. Veronica held my gaze for 2 long seconds. Then she drove away hard enough to spray gravel into the ditch. The deputies left after her. Silence settled back over the shoreline except for water moving softly through the reeds. Elena knelt again beside the mud bank. You hear what she said? She asked. About improvements? She slipped. I stared across the lake toward Silver Creek Ridge, toward the unfinished section of shoreline near the North Inlet, toward the exact stretch developers had tried buying from my father 15 years earlier. My father told them no. The same way I would, unless somebody figured out another way to take it. I walked back toward the barn without answering. Inside, an old steel filing cabinet sat against the wall beside my grandfather's workbench. I unlocked the bottom drawer and pulled out a faded leather folder thick with county plats, shoreline surveys, and deed transfers dating back to 1951. One document sat near the bottom. A handwritten easement denial, signed by my grandfather himself. I read it twice. Then I noticed something that made the back of my neck tighten. A county reference number had been added to the margin in newer ink, one I'd never seen before. Outside, Elena kept planting reeds beside Mercer Lake. And somewhere beyond the ridgeline, Veronica Hale was already acting like she owned water that legally belonged to my family. Which meant one thing. This fight started long before the 911 call. I spent half the night at the kitchen table, with county plats spread beside a cold cup of coffee, while Elena highlighted sections of runoff maps from her restoration project. The newer reference number on my grandfather's easement denial led to a filing update dated only 8 months earlier. Nobody in the Mercer family had filed anything 8 months ago. Elena, I said quietly, sliding the document across the table. Look at the county revision stamp. She leaned closer beneath the yellow kitchen light. That's impossible. Exactly. The revision reference parcel adjustments tied to Silver Creek Development Holdings. Neither of us said anything for a second. Because Silver Creek Development Holdings was the original corporation that built the subdivision before the HOA took over operations. And corporations did not revisit 60-year-old easement denials unless somebody wanted land. The next morning, Elena drove into town for supplies, while I stopped by the county clerk's office in Alder Ridge. Miriam Voss was already behind the records counter, with reading glasses low on her nose and 2 archive boxes stacked beside her desk. Miriam had worked county records for 38 years before retiring. Half the ranchers in western Montana trusted her more than attorneys. She took one look at the document in my hand and frowned. "Where'd you pull this?" "My grandfather's files." "That revision number shouldn't exist." "That's what I figured." She motioned me through the side gate behind the counter without another word. 10 minutes later, we stood in the basement archive rooms, surrounded by metal shelves and old survey ledgers that smelled like dust and machine oil. Miriam typed the revision number into the county terminal. Nothing came up. She typed it again slower. Still nothing. "That's not possible," she muttered. "Unless somebody manually bypassed indexing." Her face tightened. "That takes authorization." "From who?" "Either county planning or outside legal review." Miriam printed the hidden metadata anyway. The filing originated from a private surveying firm in Billings hired by Silver Creek Ridge HOA. Submitted 7 months ago. Quietly amended 4 shoreline parcels around Mercer Lake, including ours. I stared at the screen. "They tried to move the property line." "Not exactly," Miriam said carefully. "They tried to redefine shoreline access classification." "Which means?" "It means they're building toward an easement claim." There it was. Finally spoken out loud. Miriam leaned closer to the monitor. "Wade, if this goes through during rezoning review, the HOA could argue shared access rights for development purposes." Development purposes, boat docks, launch ramps, private shoreline access. Exactly what Veronica accidentally admitted beside the lake yesterday. I folded the printout slowly. "Can you give me copies?" "I can give you more than copies." She disappeared into another aisle and returned carrying a thin folder bound with a rubber band. 3 other ranch families filed complaints against Silver Creek Ridge over access disputes during the last 2 years. I opened the folder. Threat letters, survey disputes, HOA citations. Every complaint ended the same way. Settlement agreements, land concessions, silence. Miriam watched my expression carefully. They pressure people until legal fees scare them into signing. And if somebody refuses, her eyes met mine directly. They escalate. By the time I pulled back onto Mercer property near sunset, Elena was unloading feed bags beside the barn. But she wasn't alone. A black luxury SUV sat parked near our gate. Veronica Hale leaned against the driver door holding another certified envelope. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the satisfaction on her face. Elena noticed me first. "She's been waiting 20 minutes. Veronica smiled tightly as I walked up. "Mr. Mercer!" "Veronica." She handed the envelope toward Elena instead of me. "Final compliance notice." Elena didn't take it. "What now?" she asked. "Daily fines increase Monday." The HOA board voted unanimously. "Elena doesn't answer to your board. The property does." "No," I said calmly. "It doesn't." Veronica's eyes flicked toward me, then toward the lake behind the trees. "Always the lake. You should really reconsider fighting this," she said. "Silver Creek investors are becoming impatient." There it was again. Investors. Not homeowners. Not aesthetics. Money. Elena crossed her arms. "You keep talking like the shoreline already belongs to you." Veronica smiled without warmth. "Sometimes ownership changes before people realize it." The sentence hung there between us. Deliberate, careful, a threat disguised as advice. Then headlights swept briefly across the ranch fence behind her. Another truck sat farther down the road near the north shoreline entrance. White utility truck. Survey poles stacked in the bed. My stomach tightened immediately. Because Ethan Hale stood beside it hammering marker stakes into the ground near the lake access trail. At dusk, on Mercer property. I looked back toward Veronica. She realized too late I'd seen him. For the first time since this started, her confidence cracked slightly. "Elena." I said quietly, never taking my eyes off Veronica. Go inside and grab the camera from my office. Veronica straightened instantly. That won't be necessary. I think it will. Down near the shoreline, Ethan suddenly stopped hammering. Even from this distance, I could see him watching us, watching me. Like he understood the game had just changed. Because survey stakes placed after dark on disputed land only meant one thing. Somebody was preparing paperwork before the actual ownership fight even started. And now I had witnesses and photographs, which meant Veronica Hale had finally made her first real mistake. Elena came back from the house, carrying my old Nikon, while Ethan still stood near the shoreline stakes, pretending to study a clipboard. The second the camera appeared in Elena's hands, he started pulling stakes back out of the ground. Too late. Elena photographed everything. The truck, the markers, the GPS equipment, Ethan's company logo on the driver's side door. Veronica watched the entire thing unfold without saying another word. The confidence she carried earlier beside the lake had vanished into something tighter now, calculation. She turned toward Ethan sharply. We're leaving. Ethan didn't argue. He yanked the last marker from the mud and threw it into the truck bed hard enough to rattle the tailgate. Before climbing into her SUV, Veronica looked back at me one final time. You're making this harder than it needs to be. No, I said calmly. You did that when you crossed my fence line. Her tires spun gravel all the way down the ranch road. Elena lowered the camera slowly. They're scared now. Not yet, I said, but they will be. That night, I spread the photographs across the kitchen table beside Miriam's archive files and the revised shoreline records from county planning. The pattern started becoming obvious. Every disputed parcel connected to Silver Creek Ridge sat near water access. Every homeowner pressured by the HOA had eventually signed partial use agreements after months of fines and legal threats. And every agreement transferred temporary shoreline accommodation rights to the development committee. Temporary. That word almost made me laugh, because nothing stayed temporary once developers touched it. Elena sat across from me, highlighting dates. Look at this. She slid over a timeline she'd built from the county records. The HOA began filing shoreline revisions 6 months before Silver Creek Ridge announced its luxury expansion project. Boat docks, private marina access, seasonal rentals, a members-only waterfront district. All of it depended on one thing: Mercer Lake. Without shoreline access, the expansion died immediately, which explained why Veronica suddenly cared so much about reeds and wetlands. The next morning, I drove back into Alder Ridge before sunrise and met Miriam at the courthouse basement archives again. This time she already had 3 boxes waiting. You aren't the only one asking questions now, she said quietly. She handed me a printed email chain, internal HOA correspondence. Veronica's name appeared in almost every thread. One line stopped me cold. Pressure the old ranch family until they either comply or sell before rezoning review. Another message from Ethan followed beneath it. Construction investors won't wait forever. I looked up slowly. Where do you get these? Miriam adjusted her glasses. Somebody on the HOA board finally grew a conscience. How many people have seen them? Just you and me. I kept reading. The emails referenced legal coordination with outside survey consultants, private development meetings, and projected increases in lot values once shoreline integration was complete. They never once referred to Mercer Lake as private property, because somewhere along the line, Veronica stopped seeing the ranch as a home. To her, it was an obstacle. Miriam leaned against the archive table. You know what the ugly part is? There's an uglier part. She's done this before. Miriam opened another file. Different county, different subdivision. A retired couple lost 12 acres beside a creek after fighting HOA easement claims for almost 2 years. Legal fees buried them before the case reached court. They sold below market just to escape the fight, Miriam said quietly. I stared at the paperwork. This wasn't harassment anymore. It was strategy, and Veronica Hale had turned it into a business model. By noon, I sat across from County Land Attorney Raymond Keller in a small office overlooking Main Street. Keller reviewed the easement revisions for less than 5 minutes before removing his glasses. These filings should never have been processed. Can we stop them? If we move before rezoning review, yes. And if we don't, Keller leaned back slowly. Then Silver Creek could argue implied shared shoreline access through continuous development planning. I already knew what that meant. Years in court, massive legal costs, pressure campaigns. Exactly what Veronica wanted. Keller tapped the forged revision numbers with his pen. But if these filings were knowingly falsified, the whole thing changes. How much changes? Enough to turn a land dispute into fraud. For the first time since this started, real anger moved through me. Not loud anger, the cold kind, the kind that settles in your chest and sharpens everything around you. Because Veronica wasn't just trying to steal shoreline. She was trying to erase 3 generations of ownership with paperwork most people would never think to question. When I got back to the ranch near sunset, Elena stood beside the barn, staring toward the North Ridge through binoculars. "What is it?" She handed them to me. 2 white trucks sat near the unfinished subdivision overlook above Mercer Lake. Survey crews again. Only now they were measuring the slope leading directly toward our shoreline. One of the men pointed toward the water, while another unfolded architectural plans across a truck hood. I lowered the binoculars slowly. They're already designing it. Ella crossed her arms tightly against the cold wind. Then they think they're going to win. I looked down toward Mercer Lake, where the reeds moved softly along the shoreline she'd spent 2 years restoring. "No," I said quietly. "They think we don't know what they're doing yet." And that was the moment I stopped thinking like a ranch owner, defending land, and started thinking like a land commissioner building a case. The next Monday morning, I installed the first trail camera beside the North Shoreline Access Road. By Wednesday, there were 6, 2 hidden near the drainage culverts, 1 overlooking the Ridge Trail, 3 facing the lake itself. Elena helped me wire solar chargers beneath the old cottonwoods while I mapped vehicle entry points across the property. Neither of us talked much while we worked. Because once you realize somebody's trying to steal land through paperwork, every tire track starts meaning something. 3 days later, the cameras started paying off. At 11:42 Tuesday night, Ethan Hale's construction trucks entered Mercer property through the unfinished North Ridge Trail. No permission, no notice. The footage showed workers unloading PVC drainage pipe and laser-level equipment beside the runoff channels Elena restored last spring. At 2:13 in the morning, one worker spray-painted orange directional arrows directly onto Mercer survey stakes. At 2:41, Ethan himself arrived. He spent 20 minutes walking the shoreline, with rolled engineering plans tucked beneath one arm. Then he pointed toward the lower marsh, toward the exact wetland Elena restored, toward the exact place floodwater naturally spread during snowmelt season. I watched the footage 3 times before forwarding copies to Raymond Keller and Miriam Voss. Keller called within the hour. "Wade, they're rerouting runoff." I figured, if they redirect spring overflow away from the subdivision and into your wetlands, they can later argue the marshland became unusable waterfront, and then classify it as reclaimed development property. Silence. Then Keller exhaled slowly. "They're building legal justification for shoreline seizure." That same afternoon, Silver Creek Ridge mailed another compliance notice. This one arrived by certified mail-stamped final warning. The HOA demanded Elena remove all unauthorized shoreline vegetation within 10 business days or face escalating fines, lien proceedings, and legal enforcement. At the bottom sat Veronica Hale's signature, bold, sharp, confident. Elena read the letter once and set it beside her coffee cup. She thinks we're cornered. She thinks pressure works. Elena looked out the kitchen window toward Mercer Lake. The reeds moved softly along the waterline. Are we fighting the HOA anymore? No. What are we fighting? I slid Ethan's nighttime photographs across the table. We're fighting investors. That answer changed something between us immediately. Because HOAs harass people over paint colors and fences. Investors destroy families for waterfront access. Friday night, Veronica hosted a public HOA meeting at the Silver Creek Clubhouse overlooking the lake. Every driveway near the ridge overflowed with luxury SUVs and contractor trucks. I parked beside the gravel shoulder and walked in alone. The room quieted the second I entered. Veronica stood at the front beside a large presentation board displaying digital renderings of Silver Creek's future waterfront revitalization project. Boat docks, stone walkways, private marina access, a lakeside restaurant. Everything built directly along Mercer shoreline. She smiled tightly when she saw me. Mr. Mercer, glad you could attend. I looked at the rendering behind her. You forgot something. What's that? The part where you actually own the lake. A few nervous laughs moved through the room. Veronica ignored them. As many residents know, the HOA is currently resolving shoreline compliance disputes that have delayed several community enhancement projects. Community enhancement projects. That was the new phrase now. Not wetlands, not environmental concerns. Money finally stopped hiding behind landscaping language. A man near the back raised his hand. How delayed are we talking? Veronica answered smoothly. That depends entirely on whether certain parties continue obstructing progress. Several heads turned toward me immediately. I stayed calm. Interesting choice of words. Veronica folded her hands together. The HOA has every legal right to pursue shared shoreline access under updated development classifications. There it was. Publicly stated for the first time. I noticed several homeowners exchanging confused looks because most of them bought homes believing Mercer Lake already belonged to the community. Veronica had never corrected that assumption. I pulled a folded county plat from my jacket pocket and held it up. Then maybe somebody should explain why every original county deed still lists Mercer Lake as private family land. The room went silent. Veronica's smile disappeared completely. A man near the front leaned forward. Wait, the HOA doesn't own the shoreline? No, I said evenly, it doesn't. Murmurs spread instantly across the clubhouse. Questions followed fast. What about the marina proposal? What about the access easements? We already paid special assessment fees. Veronica raised both hands sharply. The HOA legal team is handling those concerns. No, I said. Your investors are. That hit harder, because now the homeowners realize something dangerous. This wasn't just a landscaping dispute anymore. Their money was tied to it. Veronica recovered quickly. Mr. Mercer is attempting to sabotage long-term development plans that would increase property values for every resident here. I stepped closer to the presentation board, and Ethan Hale's construction company just happened to win every shoreline contract. The room froze again. Veronica's jaw tightened visibly. Near the back, somebody quietly asked, "How much are those contracts worth?" Nobody answered, because everybody suddenly understood why Veronica had become obsessed with Elena's reads. This wasn't about its aesthetics. It was about millions of dollars sitting along Mercer Lake. I left the meeting 10 minutes later while arguments erupted behind me. But the real moment came when I reached my truck. Deputy Cole Brennan stood waiting beside it, not in uniform, hands in his jacket pockets. You stirred up a hornet's nest in there. Needed stirring. Cole glanced toward the clubhouse windows. You were right about something. What's that? The shoreline markers. I waited. Cole lowered his voice. I checked county environmental records after the 911 call. And those markers Veronica installed crossed protected runoff boundaries. How bad? Cole looked toward Mercer Lake down below the ridge. Bad enough the state might get interested. Then he handed me a folded document. Environmental drainage complaints filed anonymously against Mercer Ranch. Filed 2 weeks earlier by Ethan Hale Construction. I stared at the paperwork. They weren't just preparing development claims anymore. They were building a case to declare our wetlands environmentally unstable, which meant one thing. The next move wasn't going to be paperwork. It was going to be water. The first snowstorm hit the valley 3 days later. Not enough to bury the roads, but enough to pack fresh runoff into the high ridges above Mercer Lake. By Thursday afternoon, temperatures climbed fast, turning snowmelt into cold streams cutting down the mountain channels. Elena stood on the porch, watching the runoff gauges beside the wetlands. "They're filling too fast," she said quietly. I looked toward the north drainage line through binoculars. Water should have been flowing west into the natural spill basin Elena restored last spring. Instead, it was backing up near Silver Creek Ridge, exactly where Ethan's crews had been working. I grabbed my truck keys immediately. 20 minutes later, we reached the North Culvert Trail. The damage was worse than I expected. Fresh gravel piles blocked 2 natural runoff channels entirely. Heavy PVC diversion pipes had been installed beneath the ridge road, redirecting meltwater away from the subdivision and toward lower ground, toward us, toward Mercer wetlands, toward the lake. Elena crouched beside the culvert opening. This wasn't permitted work. No. She pointed toward fresh welding marks near the pipe joints. They rushed it. I pulled out my phone and started recording everything. The pipes, the blocked spillway, the contractor markings stamped along the steel collars. Hale Premier Infrastructure. Ethan didn't even bother hiding it anymore. A low rumble echoed across the valley. Not thunder, water pressure. The backed-up runoff finally broke through the upper diversion trench 50 yards uphill. Meltwater surged hard into the redirected channels, carrying mud, branches, and ice chunks downhill, straight toward Silver Creek Ridge. Elena looked up sharply. They miscalculated. No kidding. The wetlands she restored were designed to absorb natural overflow gradually across multiple runoff beds. But Ethan's crew narrowed the drainage into 2 artificial choke points, trying to protect the subdivision roads. Now, the entire system was failing. By the time we reached the ridge overlook, floodwater was already spilling across Silver Creek Drive. Luxury landscaping disappeared beneath muddy current. Retaining walls cracked. A decorative stone entrance sign tilted sideways as runoff hammered the hillside beneath it. And halfway down the slope, 3 lakefront properties sat directly in the path of the redirected water surge. Sirens started within minutes. HOA residents flooded onto porches, yelling while contractors scrambled to move equipment trucks uphill. I spotted Veronica near the clubhouse parking lot, screaming into her phone, while water spread across the lower roadway behind her. Then she saw me. Her face tightened instantly, like she already knew. I parked near the flooded intersection and stepped out slowly. "You rerouted runoff channels," I said calmly. "We were improving drainage infrastructure. You blocked protected spill basins. That's ridiculous." Right on cue, another surge burst through the overloaded culvert uphill. Water slammed into the subdivision road hard enough to rip decorative fencing loose from the ground. Several homeowners shouted at once. One man pointed directly at Veronica. "You said the wetlands were the problem." Another woman held up HOA assessment notices in one shaking hand. "We paid $80,000 for these shoreline improvements." Veronica tried regaining control immediately. "Everybody needs to stay calm while emergency crews evaluate the situation." But the crowd had already turned, because rich people tolerate a lot until expensive water reaches expensive floors. Deputy Cole Brennan arrived first with county emergency crews behind him. He took one look at the overflowing channels and walked directly toward me. You document everything? Already uploading copies. I handed him the footage from the diversion site. Cole watched 30 seconds silently before exhaling through his nose. They actually rerouted the entire drainage basin. Elena crossed her arms tightly beside us and bypassed the wetlands designed to absorb overflow. Cole looked uphill toward the flooding homes. That explains why your property's dry. It did. Mercer Ranch sat untouched while Silver Creek Ridge drowned in the exact runoff system Ethan tried forcing away from the subdivision. Nature corrected the math faster than lawyers ever could. Veronica marched toward us through ankled water. This situation is being exaggerated. Cole stared at her. 3 homes are flooding because Mercer wetlands blocked natural drainage. Elena stepped forward immediately. That's a lie and you know it. The HOA has engineering reports. Then show him the permits for those diversion pipes. Veronica hesitated only half a second, but long enough. Cole noticed too. You have permits, right? Silence. That was all the answer he needed. By sunset, county emergency barriers blocked the lower subdivision ends while contractors pumped water from flooded basements under portable floodlights. And every homeowner in Silver Creek Ridge now knew something critical. Mercer wetlands didn't cause the flooding. The HOA did. I stood beside the ranch fence, watching emergency crews work when my phone buzzed. Raymond Keller. You watching the news yet? He asked immediately. No, turn it on. I opened the local station live stream. Drone footage filled the screen. Flooded roads, collapsed retaining walls, emergency crews. And then the anchor said the sentence Veronica Hale feared most. County officials are reportedly investigating whether recent private drainage modifications contributed to the flooding event at Silver Creek Ridge. Investigation. That word changes everything, because flooding can be called an accident. Unauthorized runoff diversion tied to financial development interest becomes liability, huge liability. Elena stepped beside me on the porch. She's going to panic now. No, I said quietly, watching floodlights move across the subdivision below. She's going to attack. As if answering me directly, headlights suddenly appeared at the end of the ranch road. Veronica's SUV. She climbed out before the engine even stopped. Water stains still covered the legs of her pants, and for the first time since this started, she looked less like an HOA president and more like someone losing control. She stormed halfway across the yard before yelling, "This is your fault." Elena stared at her in disbelief. You diverted the runoff. You manipulated the wetlands. I stepped between them calmly. You should leave. No, Veronica snapped. I'm calling the sheriff. Right now. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, and suddenly the entire valley became very quiet. Veronica jabbed at the screen hard enough to nearly drop the phone. You're going to explain to the sheriff why half this subdivision is underwater, she snapped at Elena. You manipulated protected wetlands. You sabotaged drainage control. Elena stared at her like she couldn't believe the words were real. You redirected the runoff yourself. I have HOA engineering reports. You have illegal contractors. Veronica turned away and raised the phone to her ear. This is Veronica Hale, president of Silver Creek Ridge HOA. I need deputies at Mercer Ranch immediately. We have environmental vandalism and deliberate flood interference, causing property destruction. I watched her carefully while she spoke. No panic now, not on the surface. Veronica sounded like somebody trying desperately to regain control of a story already collapsing around her. The dispatcher must have asked for details because Veronica immediately pointed toward Elena. She's standing beside the altered wetland channels right now. Elena folded her arms tighter against the cold. She's actually trying to blame the person who restored the runoff. She's trying to survive, I said quietly. That was the truth of it. Veronica knew the homeowners would turn on her once investigators reviewed those drainage diversions. So now she needed a villain fast enough to outrun liability. She picked my wife. The call ended. Veronica lowered the phone slowly. Deputies are on the way. I nodded once. Good. That answer visibly unsettled her. Probably because most people panic when law enforcement gets involved. But panic only helps the person lying first. 20 minutes later, headlights appeared along the ranch road. 2 sheriff's vehicles rolled past the flooded lower trail and stopped beside the lake fence. Deputy Cole Brennan stepped out first. Deputy Tessa Ruiz climbed from the second SUV, carrying a field tablet and incident folder. Both deputies looked tired already. Flood response crews had been running non-stop since noon. Cole walked toward the shoreline while scanning the runoff channels. Then he saw Veronica, then Elena, then me. His expression changed immediately. Not surprise, recognition. The kind that settles into somebody's posture before they even speak. Because long before Silver Creek Ridge existed, I trained both of those deputies during county land enforcement workshops after flood season disputes up north. Cole stopped beside the wetland fence. Mr. Mercer. Cole. Tessa nodded politely. Evening, Veronica stepped forward instantly. Deputy, thank God. She altered the wetlands and flooded the subdivision. Cole didn't answer her immediately. He crouched beside the runoff trench instead, studying the water flow beneath the culvert pipe. Then he looked uphill toward the subdivision, then toward the diversion channels Ethan's crew installed. His jaw tightened slightly. How long ago were these pipes installed? Veronica answered too quickly. They're temporary drainage improvements. Permitted? Silence. Tessa already noticed the contractor stamps along the steel pipe collars. Hail Premier Infrastructure. She photographed them immediately. Veronica's voice sharpened. Deputy, the issue here is environmental sabotage by the Mercers. No, Cole said evenly. The issue right now is unauthorized runoff modification. That shifted the balance instantly. Veronica realized it too. She pointed directly at Elena. She planted barriers along protected shoreline access. Elena looked exhausted now more than angry. They're native wetlands. Those wetlands trapped floodwater. No, I said calmly. Your contractors trapped floodwater. Cole stood slowly. Mrs. Hale, we already received county flood advisories connected to altered drainage near Silver Creek Ridge. Veronica blinked. You what? Tessa turned her tablet around briefly. 3 separate resident complaints had already been filed before deputies even arrived at the ranch. Flood damage, blocked runoff, unauthorized construction, all tied to the subdivision's new drainage work. Veronica's confidence cracked hard enough to show this time. That's not possible. Cole looked directly at her. Mom, who authorized the diversion project? The HOA Development Committee. With permits? Again, silence. A dangerous silence now. Because every homeowner complaint automatically became evidence once flooding entered the picture. And evidence doesn't care who runs the HOA. Tessa walked farther down the shoreline toward the orange stakes near the reeds. She frowned immediately. These markers weren't installed by county survey teams. No, I said. They appeared after dark 3 nights ago. Tessa knelt beside one marker and brushed mud from the base. Then she looked up sharply. Cole, he walked over. Tessa pointed toward the steel pin driven beneath the survey ribbon. Environmental boundary stake. State issued. Except somebody had moved it. Cole's expression hardened instantly. You relocated protected runoff markers? Veronica actually took a step backward. I didn't personally. That's felony environmental tampering if proven intentional. The words hit like a rifle shot across the quiet shoreline. Even Elena looked stunned. Because this stopped being an HOA dispute, the second protected state markers got moved. Veronica looked around wildly now. Floodwater still rolled through the lower subdivision beyond the ridge. Emergency lights flashed red and blue against the darkening sky. And somewhere in that chaos, she realized the deputies weren't here to save her anymore. They were documenting her. Then new headlights appeared at the far end of the ranch road. Not sheriff's vehicles, black SUVs, county plates, 3 of them. Cole saw them too and exhaled quietly. "Well," he muttered, "that was fast." The first SUV rolled through the ranch gate slowly. The second followed behind it. The third carried state government plates. Veronica stared at them in confusion, then fear. Real fear this time. Because people only send that many investigators after one thing. Evidence already exists, and somebody higher up finally decided to act on it. The first black SUV stopped beside Cole's patrol unit. A woman in a dark field jacket stepped out carrying a sealed folder and a hard case marked Montana Environmental Quality. Behind her, a county fraud investigator climbed from the second SUV with a tablet already recording video. From the third vehicle came Lucas Grady. The federal wetlands agent Raymond Keller had warned me about 2 days earlier. Lucas walked straight to the shoreline without greeting anyone. He knelt beside the moved boundary stake, photographed the pin, then looked toward the diversion pipes uphill. "That's state marker 14B, he said. "It's been relocated at least 20 feet. Veronica folded her arms, trying to recover the posture of authority. "This is private HOA business." Lucas looked at her once. "No, Mom, not anymore." The woman from Environmental Quality approached Elena first. "Mrs. Mercer?" Elena nodded. "I'm Dana Whitlock, State Environmental Compliance. We received your restoration permits, runoff maps, and camera footage this afternoon." Veronica's head snapped toward me. "You sent them footage?" I didn't answer. Dana opened the sealed folder and removed 3 documents. Veronica Hale, Ethan Hale, and Silver Creek Ridge HOA are being served formal notice of investigation for unauthorized drainage modification, protected marker tampering, and potential fraudulent shoreline development filings. Veronica stared at the papers like they were written in another language. "You can't serve me on private land." Cole stepped forward. "You called us here, Mrs. Hale." That shut her down. A few Silver Creek homeowners had followed the emergency vehicles from the flooded subdivision. They gathered near the ranch gate in jackets and boots, whispering as cameras and phones came out. Ethan Hale arrived late in a mud-splattered contractor truck. The second I saw Lucas Grady, kneeling beside the drainage pipe, his face went pale. He tried backing away before anyone spoke to him. Tessa noticed. "Mr. Hale," she called, "stay where you are." Ethan stopped with one hand still on the truck door. The county fraud investigator, a square-built man named Aaron Pike, walked toward him, holding printed invoices in a plastic evidence sleeve. Hale Premier Infrastructure billed Silver Creek Ridge HOA for shoreline improvement work totaling $286,400 over the last 14 months. Ethan swallowed hard. That's standard contractor billing. Not when the work was performed on property your HOA didn't own. The gathered homeowners went dead silent. One woman near the gate whispered, "We paid for that." Aaron turned his tablet toward the crowd. "And not when the invoices describe permitted runoffs stabilization, while field evidence shows unpermitted diversion." Veronica stepped between him and Ethan. "This is a misunderstanding created by the Mercers. They've opposed community improvements from the beginning." Lucas stood now, holding a mud-stained steel marker in one gloved hand. The Mercers filed conservation restoration permits 2 years ago. Their work is documented, legal, and functioning. Your diversion system failed today because it bypassed the permitted wetland basin. Veronica's lips parted, but no words came. A local news truck rolled slowly onto the road beyond the gate. One of the flooded homeowners must have called them. Dana Whitlock handed Veronica the first notice. "This requires immediate preservation of all HOA records related to shoreline development, drainage work, contractor payments, and resident assessments." Aaron handed her the second. This is a county financial inquiry into misuse of HOA funds connected to non-owned land improvements. Lucas handed her the third, and this is a federal wetlands preservation notice. Any further disturbance along Mercer Lake without agency approval may result in civil penalties. Veronica finally took the documents. Her hands shook just slightly. Not enough for the crowd to notice. But I noticed. Because that was the first time Veronica Hale had been handed paperwork she couldn't threaten away. Ethan stepped beside her and whispered, "Don't say anything else, too late." A man from the crowd pushed forward. His basement had flooded that afternoon. Mud still streaked his boots. "Did our assessment money pay for illegal work?" Veronica faced him sharply. "Go home, Dennis." "No," he said. "Answer me." Another homeowner spoke up. "You told us the Mercers were blocking common access." A third voice followed. "You said the HOA had shoreline rights." The crowd shifted closer. For months, Veronica had pointed all their anger at Elena's reeds. Now the water had washed the lie clean. Aaron Pike raised his voice. "All residents with damage claims or assessment questions will be contacted through county channels. Do not destroy HOA notices, payment records, or contractor correspondence." Ethan turned toward Veronica. "We need counsel." Lucas looked at him. "You're going to need more than counsel." That line cut through the cold air like a blade. Then Dana said the sentence that changed everything. "Silver Creek Ridge is not the only HOA named in this preliminary inquiry." Veronica's face drained. Aaron checked his tablet. North Fork Pines, Elk Meadow Reserve, Cottonwood Basin. 3 more communities. 3 more water access disputes. 3 more sets of contractor invoices tied to Hale Premier Infrastructure. Miriam Voss stepped from behind the news truck then, wrapped in a gray wool coat, holding a banker's box against her chest. Veronica saw her and went still. Miriam walked past the reporters, past the homeowners, past Ethan, and handed the box to Aaron Pike. "Board emails," she said. "Originals and printed copies," Veronica whispered. Miriam didn't look at her. 6 years' worth. Aaron accepted the box carefully. The last of Veronica's control disappeared right there on my ranch road. Not with yelling, not with force, with records, with invoices, with emails, with the quiet sound of a banker's box changing hands. And as the news cameras turned toward the gate, I looked at Mercer Lake behind Elena. The reeds stood untouched along the waterline. For the first time in months, Veronica Hale wasn't looking at them like weeds. She was looking at them like evidence. The crowd slowly broke apart after midnight. Flooded homeowners followed county investigators toward Silver Creek Ridge, while news crews packed equipment beneath rotating emergency lights. Ethan disappeared first. He left without speaking to reporters, deputies, or even Veronica. That told me more than anything else. Men like Ethan only run when they know paperwork already exists somewhere they can't reach. Veronica stayed frozen beside the ranch gate, holding the investigation notices in both hands. Dana Whitlock gave her one final instruction before leaving. Do not alter HOA files. Do not contact board members about destroying records. And do not authorize additional shoreline work. Veronica managed one sentence. You're making a mistake. Dana didn't even slow down walking back to her SUV. No, Mrs. Hale. You made several. The next morning, Silver Creek Ridge looked like a subdivision after a storm, warning nobody listened to. Contractors pumped muddy water from basements, while homeowners argued openly beside the clubhouse parking lot. Somebody had taped copies of flood assessment invoices directly onto the HOA bulletin board. Special shoreline development fees, $18,000, $26,000, $41,000. People were finally reading what they signed. By noon, Raymond Keller arrived at Mercer Ranch carrying 2 bankers' boxes and a laptop. We've got movement, he said immediately. He spread maps and spreadsheets across our dining table, while Elena poured coffee. Every highlighted parcel tied back to water, creeks, lakes, access roads, runoff corridors. The same pattern repeated across 4 separate HOA communities over 6 years: North Fork Pines, Elk Meadow Reserve, Cottonwood Basin, Silver Creek Ridge. Each one targeted older landowners sitting beside valuable undeveloped shoreline or protected land. Each one received escalating fines, compliance threats, and disputed survey claims. And every time a family gave up, Ethan Hale Construction appeared shortly afterward with new community enhancement contracts. Elena stared at the numbers in disbelief. They did this over and over. Keller nodded grimly. And nobody connected the cases because every HOA looked independent on paper. But they weren't, I said. No. He turned the laptop toward me. A corporate filing chain connected every HOA management company through the same consulting group based in Billings. One signature appeared repeatedly. Veronica Hale. Consulting fees. Compliance oversight. Development coordination. The whole thing had been engineered carefully enough to look legal from the outside. Until Mercer Lake. Until they got greedy enough to move protected runoff markers and reroute floodwater. Keller tapped another file.
There's more.
He opened a scanned email thread recovered from Miriam's archive box. One message from Veronica to Ethan sat highlighted in yellow. Mercer shoreline acquisition becomes impossible if restoration permits survive environmental review. Another line beneath it, then discredit the wetlands first. Elena sat very still after reading that. Not angry, hurt. Because the wetlands weren't just dirt and reeds to her. She spent 2 years restoring runoff habitat that used to protect migratory birds before developers stripped most of it away, and Veronica tried turning it into a weapon. My phone rang before anybody spoke again. Deputy Cole Brennan. You home? Yeah, we've got a problem. 20 minutes later, Cole pulled into the ranch yard carrying an evidence bag. Inside sat a burned hard drive, found behind the Silver Creek clubhouse dumpster this morning. Keller looked up sharply. Recovered data? Partial. Cole removed a folded printout from his jacket pocket. County Tech's restored fragments before the drive completely failed. He handed the paper to me. Deleted accounting logs, private transfers, consulting reimbursements, and one line item repeated dozens of times across all 4 HOAs. Strategic acquisition incentives, paid directly to board members who approved disputed shoreline actions. Elena looked stunned. They bribed people. Keller shook his head slowly. Worse, they normalized it. That afternoon, county investigators officially froze every HOA-controlled account tied to Veronica's consulting group. The news spread fast. By evening, homeowners gathered outside the Silver Creek clubhouse, demanding emergency board resignations. Somebody spray-painted fraud across the marina rendering Veronica displayed at the meeting earlier that week. And for the first time since this started, Veronica stopped attacking publicly. No letters, no threats, no newsletters, nothing. Silence, which worried me more than the yelling ever did. Because people like Veronica don't disappear quietly unless they're trying to protect something bigger. I found out what that was just after dark. Miriam called my cell phone. Wade, get to the courthouse now. I arrived 15 minutes later. She waited beside the basement archive room looking furious. They were here. Who? 2 men asking for old parcel transfer records connected to Mercer Lake. My stomach tightened immediately. Did they get anything? No. But one of them signed the visitor log. She handed me the clipboard. The signature belonged to an attorney from Denver, specializing in emergency land restructuring and offshore asset transfers. Keller read the name over my shoulder. They're moving money. Out of state? Probably before federal seizure orders hit. Miriam crossed her arms tightly. Then you better move faster. Back at the ranch, Elena sat beside the fireplace, reading through flood damage reports from Silver Creek residents. She looked up when I walked in. What now? I handed her the courthouse visitor log. She read the attorney's name once, then again. They're trying to run, yeah, Outside, Mercer Lake sat black and still beneath the cold Montana sky. The reeds along the shoreline moved softly in the wind, protected, standing, exactly where Veronica tried to erase them. And somewhere beyond the ridgeline, Veronica Hale was finally learning the difference between controlling a neighborhood and triggering a federal fraud investigation. The federal seizure order hit 48 hours later. By sunrise, county deputies blocked access to the Silver Creek clubhouse, while investigators carried boxes of financial records through the front doors under camera flashes and satellite trucks. Nobody in the valley talked about anything else. Not the flood damage, not the coming winter, just Veronica Hale. By noon, every local station in western Montana ran the same headline: Multi-HOA fraud probe expands across 3 counties. Elena sat at the kitchen table, reading the article twice, while coffee steamed between her hands. They finally said your name. I looked up from the window overlooking Mercer Lake. The report called me former Montana State Land Commissioner Wade Mercer, whose evidence triggered the investigation. I didn't care about that part. What mattered sat halfway down the article. Federal officials confirmed Mercer Wetlands Restoration complied fully with state environmental protections and likely prevented substantially greater flood damage during last week's runoff event. Elena smiled quietly for the first time in weeks. Not victory. Relief. Because somebody in authority finally said publicly what she'd known all along. The wetlands worked. 3 days later, Veronica Hale was indicted. Fraudulent easement filings, financial conspiracy, tampering with protected environmental markers, misuse of HOA assessment funds. Ethan Hale was indicted the same afternoon. Investigators traced over $3.8 million in contractor payments and consulting transfers through shell companies connected to all 4 HOA communities. Turns out Mercer Lake wasn't their first attempt, just their biggest. The emergency HOA meeting at Silver Creek Ridge happened the following Monday night. This time nobody needed convincing. Homeowners packed the clubhouse, shoulder to shoulder, demanding resignations before the meeting even started. Voss sat quietly in the front row with copies of archived emails stacked beside her chair. Veronica arrived 20 minutes late with 2 attorneys and no eye contact for anyone in the room. The shouting started immediately. You lied to us. You said the lake already belonged to the HOA. My basement flooded because of your contractors. A man near the back held up 3 special assessment invoices. We paid for fraud. Veronica tried speaking twice. Nobody let her finish. Finally, the acting board treasurer stood and announced emergency dissolution proceedings against the existing HOA leadership structure. Then came the vote, unanimous. Veronica Hale removed as HOA president effective immediately. A second vote followed. Termination of all shoreline development proposals connected to Mercer Lake. Unanimous again. When Veronica finally walked out of the clubhouse under flashing news cameras, nobody followed her, not even Ethan. Especially not Ethan. His attorneys separated him from her 2 days later during preliminary hearings. That told everybody exactly how bad the evidence had become. Winter settled over the valley while the legal process moved forward. Some stories end with dramatic courtroom speeches. This one ended with spreadsheets, bank records, survey maps, deleted emails, and one banker's box, Miriam Voss, carried out of a courthouse basement at exactly the right moment. Raymond Keller negotiated the final settlement package 6 months later. Every disputed easement tied to Silver Creek and the 3 connected HOAs was voided permanently. Affected homeowners received restitution from frozen development accounts. The state revoked Ethan Hale Construction's environmental licensing, and Veronica Hale accepted a plea agreement that barred her from serving on any HOA or land development board in Montana again. The county judge signed the final order on a rainy Thursday morning in March. Then she looked directly at Veronica before closing the file. Private communities do not exist outside property law, Mrs. Hale. That line spread across local papers all weekend. By spring, Silver Creek Ridge looked different, quieter, less polished, more honest. The giant marina rendering disappeared from the clubhouse wall. So did the luxury shoreline brochures. In their place sat a simple notice announcing runoff restoration partnerships with county environmental volunteers. Elena helped write the program herself, not because she forgave Veronica, because she cared more about the lake than revenge. That part always mattered most to me. Late April brought the first monarch butterflies back to Mercer Lake. Elena spotted them near the reeds one morning while planting fresh sedges along the lower marsh bank. Children from Alder Ridge Elementary arrived that afternoon for the county's first wetland education program, funded through the settlement grants. One little boy stopped beside the shoreline and pointed toward the reeds. "Is this the place from the news?" Elena smiled. "Yup." "The place everybody fought over?" She looked out across the water for a second before answering. "No," she said softly. "This is the place everybody finally stopped trying to own." I stood near the old fence line, watching the wind move through the restored wetlands while sunlight broke across Mercer Lake. No contractors, no survey stakes, no HOA notices taped to our gate. Just water, reeds, birdsong, land that stayed exactly where my grandfather left it. The lake remained untouched. The ranch stayed in the Mercer family. And the silence Veronica Hale once tried to control finally belonged to the land again.
I think the biggest lesson in all this is that most fights over land don't really start with fences or paperwork. They start when people stop respecting what something means to somebody else. Elena didn't restore those wetlands for money. She did it because she understood that land takes care of people when people take care of it first. And in the end, the truth help because records matter, pages matter, and staying calm matter. Nobody won by yelling the loudest. There's something steady about folks who know where they come from. Sometimes standing your ground doesn't look dramatic at all. Sometimes it's just refusing to shy from paper, refusing to push up your own land, and trusting that the two can still carry weight if you keep good records and don't lose yourself along the way. If you ever deal with HOA and a land dispute or somebody trying to pressure you into backing down, probably stand down in the comments. I'm really glad to hear your story. And if this kind of quiet, proud story about ranch life, property rights, and everyday people holding on to their dignity means something to you, go ahead and subscribe. There's plenty more county left and plenty more story with worth telling.